Hi, I'm Josh. Welcome to my review of A Light So Hateful by Haley Piper. This is Piper's newest release, released back in October of 2023. This is actually only my second read by her, the first of which was actually on my best of list of 2023. Unfortunately, I read this one very late in the year and it could not make it to that list. Otherwise, it may have, because I did love this book, and I'm really excited to talk to you about why I did. So Piper has received the Bram Stoker Award for her past work, many of which is more Lovecraftian in nature. And she's known for using very vivid and raw imagery and writing in her books. But she uses it to explore real-world issues, real-world societal issues. And that, as I've talked about before on my channel, is what type of horror that I love most. It's probably why I love her so much. But it's not just how she does that. It's her writing. That was the first thing I noticed when I read her first book. It was just how easy and gorgeous her writing is. Some of the descriptions in this book, it's just so vivid, but also really, I don't want to say obscure, it's just a unique way of describing something. The way she's able to think about it and present it is unnerving, disturbing, but also, honestly, really beautiful. And that's part of what makes her probably a new favorite horror writer of mine. It's just the writing itself. And the books, I think, are also pretty compelling. So let's think about what's going on in this book. Olivia is I believe, 17, maybe 18-year-old woman, or girl rather, who lives in a small town, and she lives with adoptive parents. We introduced to her at this drive-in theater where she works, and as the story goes on, we learn more about her. She ran away from home about 3 years ago when her parents saw her kissing a girl, and she knew too much about her parents to reckon with that. So once that happened, she just panicked and she ran away, and she ran to this town, and she found a couple who were willing to take her in. And as far as we can tell, they are now what she considers her new family, people that she loves and adores. It is in this drive-in theater where the story gets introduced, where we basically just get introduced to Olivia and the tone of this town, where it's a bunch of teenagers here watching these movies, kind of doing what teenagers do. One of the first characters that get introduced, other than Olivia, is this guy who's into her, but he's not the one I'm most interested in. Rather, it's a character called Christmas, a non-binary teenager who is not well known in the town, who seems to be a newcomer. And as they get introduced to Olivia, it's very clear that there is this sort of dark, almost not gangster, but biker-esque type person who's like very grungy, doesn't care what you think about them. And it's just a very vivid and almost caricature-esque interpretation. They were also really, I don't want to say off-putting, but almost terrifying. And this is the first hint of potential horror that we get introduced to when we talk to Christmas. It makes us wonder, what role are they going to play? And it's not clear. I'll just say that something happens and our first introduction to Christmas gets cut short. And from there, we're left wondering, will this person come back into play? They must come back into play because they seem so important. It really creates a sense of dread, of worry, of saying, who is the real threat here? What are the threats? What's going to happen? The first major situation that we introduced to really is when there's this group of teens who start basically bullying a woman in the crowd. Olivia goes to investigate, and basically all hell breaks loose. I'll leave that because I don't want to spoil the direction the story is going to go. Basically, things start going crazy, and Olivia and everyone else start fleeing for their lives. As the story goes on, we get introduced to other characters, principally among them her best friend, Sunflower, someone who Olivia has basically been in love with so long as she has known her, which is the last 3 years. The story is structured sort of like not a road trip, but it's sort of a journey where things in this town, maybe even the whole world, it's not clear, become almost apocalyptic, and trying to just get by without being spotted by these monsters that are in the town. What kind of monster it is, I won't say. I'll let you read the book to find that out. But it creates this air of dread, of terror, of not knowing if anywhere is safe, having to look where you're going and just try to stay hidden from any possible threat that could be out there. That story is a major part of it. Like basically once we have that setup established, we get to understand our characters better. Sunflower, Olivia, and eventually we get to better understand Christmas. I don't want to really say where Christmas fits into this because I think it's so good to not understand how they fit into the puzzle. Just know that they do. I guess what I'll say is the story settles on a certain idea, but about halfway through or so, it still doesn't pivot, but it begins to resolve itself on exactly where this threat originated, how it started. And in many ways, there were some ideas that are, I think, very subtly and effectively hinted at and set up for this big reveal later on in a way that if you're a really keen eye, you might actually see it coming, especially even other, I think, more obvious reveals that I didn't even think about. And I don't want to say it's like some huge surprise. I like to see that. I partly because while I enjoyed the story, it was getting like to the point where I kind of was losing interest. Not say losing interest so much as I felt like we had got familiar with the situation and I wanted something to change. And right as I started to feel that way, the story introduced a brand new dynamic for us to understand. What it is basically is a story that explores Olivia's relationship with Sunflower and eventually to understand also, of course, the role of Christmas, as I hinted at before. And I'll leave the plot at that. I may explore the end of this review. I don't think I will. But for now, I'll leave it at that, and I'll just now transition to talk about what the themes are being explored, because I think that'll help you better understand what to expect as far as feels go. A big part of this plot has to do with trauma and love and hate and imagination. I think they all go together really well because imagination has a lot of potential. It can help inspire us. It can drive us to do things new and exciting things and try new things. But it can also help us fixate and get lost in our anxieties and our fears and our hate. And there is such a beautiful use to imagination, but also I think a terrifying possibility of getting lost in it if you're not careful. And I think that, again, that bleeds into trauma and how if there is trauma in our life, in our past, and we don't address it, it will still be there. It will still heavily impact how we think. Even if it's on an unconscious level, it will be there and it will control how we think about things moving forward. If we don't address it, it will become almost a defining part of who we are because we have yet to really reckon with that trauma. How that feeds into imagination and the idea of love and hate and the potential of those two things is just so strong. Like, hate is such a major idea that we know what to expect coming in here. And very early in the story, I talk about all hell breaking loose. That's where this idea of hate really comes into play. It creates such emotion and almost anxiety for the reader to just see all this festering to the surface and not understanding why. As we explore these ideas of the power of imagination, of trauma and hate and love, we begin to understand, or we begin to reveal, once we get that big reveal of what exactly is going on, things begin to make more sense, at least on an emotional level. And for me, that's part of why I love this story so much, was how it's able to use these ideas to create such a strong bond between me and the characters in a story. I think the writing is a strong part. Like the fact that I loved her writing really opened me up to, I think, accepting these characters and accepting this world. I mentioned Christmas as a caricature. I want to make it very clear. I don't think these characters are caricatures. They're very well fleshed out, and any sort of caricature nature of them is very deliberate, and it's almost a part of the plot to understand why that is there. Even Olivia's relationship to Sunflower and the almost unhealthy fixation she has on her is a major plot point that is not left unaddressed. And that's what gets us the idea of identity, selfhood. Who are we? Why are we? And why are we here? And who gets to define who we are? Who gets to decide the kind of person we are? And the things that we choose to do. Even now as I talk about it, I'm getting so emotional. It's very specific to our characters, these ideas, but in a way that I think is very easy to connect with as a reader, because these are all things, of course, we have to deal with in the real world, and that's what makes the story so powerful and so beautiful. I also didn't mention it's also very queer. Obviously, Olivia and Sunflower, and also we have non-binary representation, which I love. And while it may be a character who is potentially villainous, I still think it is with a distinct purpose. I think seeing that by non-binary representation is overall really good. And again, I don't want to say why. I just think you have to read the story to really appreciate how that fits in. Each of these characters, they all reflect on one another, and in a way that you really can't understand without digging into it. So a big idea also that's explored, another theme I should say that I didn't really touch on, but that you can see will fit into this, is just the nature of human nature. Again, what makes us who we are, what drives us, the idea of love and hate. Of course, all these things sort of feed in one another, the different ideas explored from a different lens. And that's also a major idea here of where is this hate stemming from? I don't want to say it's necessarily the book is meant to be a reflection on the current state of society, of how polarized we all are and how much hate that many of us have for one another, or borderline hate. But I do think that this book comes at a particular time where it makes that idea of hate such a powerful thing to explore, even if it's not expressly or explicitly targeting the idea of how we as a society have so much hate or can have so much hate. But I think on a personal level, it helps us reflect on our own feelings of love, hate, where it's coming from, and whether or not that hate is fundamentally productive and what we can do about it, and whether or not that hate, where it comes from, if it comes from trauma, how we address it, and recognizing that if we don't address it, it will only end poorly. I think that's what I'm going to leave it as far as themes goes. As far as where the story ends up, I meant to do this here in the plot, but I think discussing themes works out well. I really liked it. I've talked about before that I don't like safe endings, and I think stories like this, where it deals with such real heavy topics, it needs to have consequence. Without saying exactly what happens, I will say there is serious consequence. I mean, the things that go on in the story, they matter. They matter to our characters, to the world, and things they don't just go away. This story, at least by good reasons, is compared to one of Wad's Bunny, and I think that actually is a really good comparison. Bunny is probably a bit more abstract than the story is, but that idea is of the way in which young women, the clicks they make or the ideas they have, and some of the more harmful ideas that are often seen, I guess, in those type of friend groups, or something that's hinted at here. But at the same time, it isn't monolith. It's very unique. There's hints of that there. I think some of the best types of ways with the ideas that are being explored. But overall, it really is its own thing. If there's one thing I want you to take away, it's just how much I really loved this book and how much I really love Kelly Piper. Even if you don't read this book first, I strongly recommend you to check Kelly Piper out. I think she is a horror writer who is honestly just underappreciated, underhyped. Having read 2 of her works now, I just think she should be a bigger name in on BookTube and in just the horror community in general. I know there are obviously going to be those who do read it. I just think it's one of those authors who I think does horror really well, and it's one of those authors who I just think deserve some attention. I think people are really likely to enjoy her writing and really appreciate the way in which she approaches these ideas in a very skillful way. And I just think really amazing writing. If you're interested in my general number review, I probably give it between a 4 and 4.5. I need some time to decide if I'm going to go up to 4.5 stars, but still, it's one of my favorite horrors that I read in 2023, and I'm really excited to be talking about it here. If you watched the review, I really appreciate it. Let me know if you read Piper before, or if you think you might know. I definitely think she deserves some hype. But as always, hope you all have a great day and stay safe, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.